Well, let's go ahead and get started. The latecomers can trickle in. So hello, everyone. I'm Zab Johnson, the Executive Director and Senior Fellow of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And the aim of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative is to bring together brain science and business in an effort to improve business, drive new discoveries and applications, enrich community engagement, like we're doing today, and enhance the education of future leaders. Welcome. We're really excited to be launching this new webcast and podcast series exploring vulnerability, authenticity, and trust from diverse perspectives. Together with my co-hosts, human behavior expert Leila Entezam, and faculty director of Wharton Neuroscience, Professor Michael Platt, we're really excited to be launching this new webcast and podcast series. Now more than ever, there is an urgency for professional landscapes to create environments that foster vulnerability, authenticity, and trust, especially for successful teamwork. However, this often goes against the cultural and individual norms of those who work in these areas, as there's a persistent perception that this can be counter to expected behaviors that demonstrate leadership, authority, and even expertise. Our aim with this web and podcast is to share insights in this space from diverse perspectives, including what we know from neuroscience and human behavior, which will be what we as the hosts will bring to the conversation. Today, we're joined by a phenomenal guest panel, which includes Kay Warren, who is the co-founder of Saddleback Church, Xavier Glasper, Vice President and Business Unit Leader with McCarthy Building Companies, and Laken Tomlinson, offensive guard with the San Francisco 49ers and 7th-year NFL veteran. We'll have each of our guests introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into what I think will be a fantastic discussion. Please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We will be moderating those questions throughout the hour, so no need to wait to ask your question. We'll get to them if we have time. And please feel free to use the chat feature to have a more informal conversation and to interact with each other and with us as guests. So let's get started. I'll ask my panelists to turn on their cameras and their microphones. Welcome, everyone. So we'll start today with a brief introduction from Kay Warren. Take it away, Kay.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be with you today on this inaugural podcast. I was raised in a culture that really didn't value vulnerability. There was a lot of hiding and pretending. My father was a pastor in small churches in Southern California at a time when clergy were expected pretty much to be perfect. And so we had a lot of family secrets because, of course, our family was not perfect. And there were some things that we hid that were like my father had been divorced before. That was not okay in the culture in which I grew up. The fact that I had a half sister, that I had a brother who had a heroin addiction, that I had been molested as a child, not by a family member, but someone in my dad's church. Those were just all things we did not talk about. And so I got used to holding up this ideal of perfection and knowing all the answers. I had to be the first one in Sunday school with my hand up, and and then when I married a minister, I married a pastor, so who had also grown up in that same type of environment where authenticity was not particularly valued, and our marriage quickly. I only half jokingly say our marriage descended into marital hell on the honeymoon and then went down from there. But there was just no one to tell. That just wasn't allowed. That was not considered anything that we could do. And it continued that way until one day we decided that the pain was too great. And we went to marriage counseling, and in that process, that began to crack the door open in my life and my approach to vulnerability, because I realized that I didn't have to be perfect to be loved. And that began to change things for me. And we decided that we felt that we were going to start a church. We started Saddleback Church in January of 1980. And that we were going to do church differently than our parents had. And I can say now at this stage, after almost 42 years that we have built a church that is different, that is really built on vulnerability, authenticity, and trust. And so here it's sort of the last stages of our career. I can really speak to the value of those three things as making a difference, both in my life and in the church that we've led.
Fantastic. It's a great starting place, I think, to ground everything. And I think the idea of a faith-based organization is going to be a great addition to our conversation. All right, let's turn things over to Xavier Glasper.
Thank you, Zab, and the panelists and everyone for joining today. I guess much like Kay, I didn't realize that, Kay, we should probably get together and fellowship a little bit. I was also raised in a family where we were taught that what happens inside of the four walls of the home stayed within the four walls of the home. My family was also very much into church. Both my parents today are theologists. So if that gives you any inclination of that background. As a child, we moved to a place where we were truly the minority. And that probably helped to strengthen that culture of our family, meaning to say that we couldn't express to friends or other folks that were in our space simply because other racial issues, other tensions that were prevalent in the Midwest in the mid 1970s as I was growing up. So that made obviously us a little bit tighter as a family, but some of the things that also led to that dysfunction is we had no outlets. Shortly after high school, I joined the military. And for those of you who may be guessing, that was no place for vulnerability. There was no place to say that I care, or maybe I should cry, or hug your fellow soldier or sailor or airman or Marine. That it just didn't happen. So this was a compounding of that same rhetoric from a child through some issues with race in the Midwest to now serving in the military and the DOD for some time. And though I've had very good partners who helped me through that over, and by and large, it was probably more difficult. Shortly after getting out, I gained licensure as a professional. I'm a geomatics engineer by trade, and started my own business. So I thought, man, here's the chance to develop the kind of culture and space and place that I want to be in, and model the behavior for everyone else. But oh my goodness, what I didn't know is all of that practice had made this permanent for me. Like, it was really hard to undo that. Again, also being in the Midwest, a minority-owned firm, there was always a struggle with that. For those of you who are small business owners, the pressures of making payroll, and all of those things don't always bring out the best side of us in that space. So once again, I hid a lot of those things, probably did not allow my team to be as open and honest as they could, and I was never going to do that with them. But much like UK, now I'm working at a place for McCarthy Building Companies, a place that embraces this space, that truly gives their leaders a chance to do and say and be all the things that we represent here in today's session. So I'm peeling back some of those layers. I've done some deep work outside, working with coaches to try to get to this space so that I can not just help myself be better, but help others as they ascend up the ranks.
Great. Thanks very much, Xavier. And I love that you're representing National Hispanic Heritage Month with McCarthy. That's an important aspect. So now we'll move on to Laken Tomlinson. Laken.
Thank you, Zap. And thank everyone for having me on today. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Jamaica. I moved to the States when I was 10 years old. Me and my family, my mom and my three other siblings moved from Jamaica to Chicago. And as you can imagine, it was a big culture shock for me as a young kid, switching schools and learning to speak English, and, just kind of a little bit about my background. Growing up in Jamaica, we just weren't really a open family when it came to speaking our feelings and talking about ourselves and opening up to others, especially in our family. So, it was very, very tough to, transition with that from Jamaica to the United States, and then going to school, dealing with the change of scenery, and just growing up in Chicago is just totally different from Jamaica. I remember, just being able to be so free and run around outside to the cold, bitter winters of Chicago, not being able to go outside and play with my siblings and my cousins, because there's just a lot of gang violence and everything around. And, we didn't really have anyone to talk to at the time. And, I got an outlet with football, and football was kind of like my escape from the realities of the world. So I played football in high school at Lane Tech. Was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Duke University, where I met my wife, and we went on to college together. Fortunate enough to be drafted by Detroit Lion, and now I can say that I'm a starter for the San Francisco 49ers. And it's been an interesting process for me, making that transition from college to the NFL. In college, I felt football for me was like my outlet, but some of the same things that I experienced growing up as a child stayed with me, and throughout college and through the NFL, where I just wasn't able to open up, and I wasn't able to really be myself. I wasn't able to be vulnerable to my teammates, my coaches. And early on in my career, it was very hard for me. It was very hard for me to open up to a lot of people. But I was fortunate enough to be in an organization like the San Francisco 49ers, where the environment they had there allowed players to open up and really be themselves, be vulnerable around each other. The authenticity of the whole organization was real, and it was very healthy environment. So I truly enjoyed the challenges I had throughout my career, and I can truly say that the vulnerability, toughness, and authenticity it's a real thing. So I'm very excited to be part of the panel.
Fantastic. And maybe a little known secret about Laken is that he was also a psychology and pre-health major while at Duke. We know that because we were at Duke at the same time, and watched him in that space. So he is himself a little bit of a human behavior expert. And I'll turn things over now to Leila to begin our in-depth discussion. Leila looks like she might be on the shores of Jamaica instead of in the colder climes. So take it away, Leila.
Thank you, Zab. Deepest gratitude to Wharton, first of all, for being open to this podcast, and to the Neuroscience Initiative team, and to all of you for seeing value in spending your precious time here to have this conversation. And Laken, I am going to pick your brain about human behavior and hope to learn a couple of things from you. So
of course.
Thank you. Quick piece on my background. I have a background in neuroscience, business, and psychology. My passion is helping leaders gain an understanding of themselves, their drivers, their purpose, and how to achieve that with deep passion. I started out as pre-med. I moved to the corporate world. I've held C-suite roles. I've done international business. There was always something missing. I needed to feel like I was making a difference in the world, and that the work that I did mattered. I added a clinical background to my portfolio, and I'm deeply grateful to have that all merged today in what I do in the space of bringing neuroscience and psychology and human behavior together into the professional landscape, and working with leaders in that. So I'll start off with our first question, if you don't mind. So how has your experience in climbing the ladder, your lived experience while staying authentic to yourself with respect to vulnerability and authenticity and trust transpired? So how has your experience been in climbing the ladder while staying authentic to yourself in this space? I will start with Kay and then Xavier.
Sure. Well, we started the church with 7 people in our little condo in Orange County, California in January of 1980. We were 25. And most of the people, the other 7 people were a little older than us. And so it was pretty remarkable that they trusted us, these wild-eyed, dreamers who wanted to reinvent church. We had, like I said, both grown up in church, but felt like, that in 1980, that was the high point of the boomers, and we were boomers, and we were looking to reach people like ourselves, maybe who just weren't interested in church. And so that whole idea of kind of reinventing the way some of it was done was pretty crazy. And so people had to trust us to even invest any of themselves. We invested all of our meager savings. We said, we're committed to living in Orange County the rest of our lives. We really want to be a part of the community. And so as over time, we've grown to 20 campuses on 4 continents, have a weekly attendance. Before COVID's messed everything up, but was, about 25,000 people a week. And so over those decades, the pressure to try to please so many people, to modify ourselves so that because everybody wants to be liked, and yet as the organization, that many people, as it grew, that just wasn't possible. We could no longer have everybody over in our home once a week for dinner or get to know people. We weren't at all the weddings and the funerals and the baby showers and the all of those things. It became more impersonal in some ways. So the challenge to remain personal and authentic and vulnerable, and yet keep building trust in a church, in a faith organization that was growing by leaps and bounds, and it wasn't all centralized in one location. Now suddenly it was in different cities in California, and then all of a sudden it was in different continents, and so that has been a major challenge to inculcate that value of vulnerability and authenticity across the different church campuses across those continents, and working in different cultures. Then it's not just, we can't just impose a Western viewpoint of what that looks like. It's how does authenticity and vulnerability and trust, what does it look like in Buenos Aires? What does it look like in Berlin? What does it look like in Manila, Philippines? What does it look like in Hong Kong? So different cultures had to look through different lenses. We couldn't just look through one lens. But one of the things that Rick and I have held as a value our entire married life was we want to live an integrated life. We want our public life and our private life to match as closely as possible. And so dealing with the expectations, people expect clergy to be superhuman, truly to be superhuman, to never be grumpy with each other, to never have a bad day, to never doubt God. We're just expected to be perfect, and you have to live on this little, pedestal. And we just decided that, that wasn't the way we were going to live personally, but how do we keep that going as the church gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we can't maintain that same kind of personal contact. But what we decided that in that early marriage, counseling that cracked open the door for us to be vulnerable was to continue that. So we have always talked from the stage, from the pulpit, about our marital problems, about, as I said, molestation, about our son's mental illness, about our doubts spiritually, those days where things weren't going well. And so as we have set that example, it's filtered down. And I really believe, as probably all of you would agree, that setting the culture starts at the very top. And if we were starting to hide and pretend, then how could we expect our congregation or our other staff to be anything but also hiders and pretenders? So as we have lived vulnerably, that has become a value, a really high value in the culture of Saddleback. And I can genuinely say that I really believe that's true. One more thing I'll say on that and then stop is that about 10 years in, a church member came to Rick and said, I have been an alcoholic, struggled with alcoholism. I've gone to AA, but I'm a Christian. Is there any way we could have a faith-based, like Alcoholics Anonymous? And we started something called Celebrate Recovery. And that was in like 1990. And in the ensuing, whatever that is, 30 years, we've had 27,000 of our members go through Celebrate Recovery, and about 35,000 churches around the world have Celebrate Recovery. So it's not just what we say, it's down to the level of everybody's got a hurt, a habit, and a hang up. And that does not make you less than, it actually makes you human. Sorry.
That is remarkable. As I'm listening to all of that, first of all, obviously how inspiring that is, but also that is it difficult to stay true and authentic to yourself as you're also trying to give that same courtesy to other cultures, other people, other age brackets, etc. While everything you're doing and everything you are is on display, does it become hard to stay true to who you are? And so I appreciate you shedding some light on that. Thank you. Xavier?
Laken, you sure you don't want to go next? But I'm not sure I can follow. Okay. Inspirational. So a little bit different, as I said before. For me, it started as a kid. I knew that my parents were pretty private. I knew that our entire family was that way. Our extended family outside of the household. And what that did was that caused us, as I said before, to just trust and rely on each other a bit more. So the first time I got to come out of the house, so to speak, was as a kid. We would participate in talent shows. So because my parents were really big in the church, I was always in the choir, or I sang or directed. So I already had those skills. But now I want to come out into the open to try and test the waters, to see how vulnerable I could really be. And so a friend of mine and we joined a talent show. Don't know how, but we won the talent show, and it opened up this space around me and him and a few of our friends. And much like anything you get as a kid, when it feels really good, you want that, right? You probably want that more than you should have it. So the next year we entered the talent show again, and oh my goodness, we won again. What I realized was happening around me, though, the folks that were around me, I could be myself, but there was 3 or 4 of them. Whenever we would get around other people, or I should say off the stage, I would go back to being my normal self, not as open, not participating in any of the dialogues, but on stage, it was a home for me. I felt really safe there. And when we'd get off and we'd hang out together, great, but just not around others. So then experiencing that through some of the racial tension that we went through as well in the Midwest, I had 2 or 3 really good friends that I hung out with. And man, in that space, we celebrated and had great times together at their parents' house, over at my parents' house. We really had a good time. But at school, it was really tough for people who wanted to befriend me out in public, like around other people. There was a little piece of that in the old 80s movie, The Breakfast Club. Like, will we be friends after this detention? Like, we hung out today, but on Monday, are you going to say hi to me? So most of my junior high and high school years were kind of like that. Was it 1 or 2 people that hung out with me, and everyone else was kind of how they were? But then I went to the military, and it reinforced some of the things I learned as a kid from the talent show. I was on a unique team. We served for special operations and special operations support. So we were getting the best of the best, all the latest and greatest technology, A shameless plug for GPS, Global Positioning Systems. My team set the ground control for that throughout Europe. So we were always in an elite space and place with others. So again, much like winning the talent show, I felt really good around that group of people. But if we ever had to go and be with the other folks in the DoD or other folks in units, I would just clam up. Once I had a friend that expressed that he had some trouble, and we were on a parallel path of the ranks. And needless to say, he expressed this, he received some counseling, and the next promotion that came up, we'd been neck and neck the whole time. He didn't get it. So I got promoted. So what that showed me was, hey, you really better not do these things. Like, put it in a box, deal with it later. You aren't going to get a chance to do this, right? So those are just the reinforced behaviors that I've seen again and again. So how am I being true to myself? I'm just not, right? This whole time, I'm really not being authentic to Xavier, right? The friends that I have, the very few, I believe I am in those spaces. But as I look back, I probably wasn't very authentic or vulnerable with them either. And though we had trust in a space that was based on having each other's lives in our hands, right? Which is some kind of trust link. Laken, I'm sure you can kind of relate to the safety on the field, right? Trusting that person to get the block or to pick up that tackle, like that's a thing. So that space felt good. But then I got out and got into the civilian world, and man, I was just not ready. For a long time, I think I was a little depressed when I got off active duty. I started going to school. I didn't befriend anyone. I was a little bit older than your typical freshman at the time. So that was another reason for me to just kind of stay to myself. And as I look back, some of the companies that I work for, the friends that I have in there were just one or two. It was just that same reinforced space place. I feel like I'm drumming on, Leila, so don't let me do that. But then I got to my business, as I said earlier, and I thought, all of a sudden, I'm going to turn this on. All of a sudden, I'm going to build a team that can be honest and trust each other and be vulnerable. I just didn't have the skills to do that. I had a coach, and the coach worked with us. What I learned in that space was we trusted each other to get the job done, much like my military career, much like my friends performing with me in the talent shows. But the trust ended at the workplace. It did not carry over into anywhere. I never invited anyone to my home. We didn't have cookouts or barbecues together. As a business owner, small business owner, I had like 10, 12, 15 employees. You would just do that, right? Not so much. Fast forward to selling the business to McCarthy and being a part of this company. When I came out here to Southern California, I don't know, maybe it's just in the air. One of the first things my regional president and friend Mike Myers encouraged me to do was invite my staff over to the house. Like, that would be the first thing that you do. They're all coming from the Midwest and a couple of places. It was colder in the winter. SoCal's got great weather. We're looking at the ocean. And I was just really nervous. And I did that. Our first offsite, I talked about the elephants in the room, things that I brought with me, my baggage. And I asked them to share with me. We even bought little elephants, and we have them on our desk today. Like, what's your elephant in the room? So this was the place and space to try and start dealing with these things. And it's been a long time coming. And again, here in McCarthy and here in our teams, and, I'm not perfect by any means. I'm sure my teammates will tell you that, but we're getting there. And that's kind of been my journey, being true to the work, Leila, trusting the team to do the work has always been there. Being vulnerable, really just leaning into that now. Being authentic is also a little bit tough. I just shared something about psychological safety with my team recently. And when I get there, I think, hats will come off and we'll all be ecstatic. So.
Thank you. I can understand how challenging it might be when you create these definitions and these compartments, and then, that's reinforced that that's serving you well. And now suddenly you're trying to break all that and set a new mold for yourself, especially when those molds were what made you feel safe in the world before. So absolutely. I'll pass it on to Michael, who can give our friend Laken our next question.
Thanks, Leila, and I'm really grateful to everybody here on the panel and everybody who's joined us today. So, and I'm glad that Xavier brought up this concept of psychological safety, which has really risen to the fore, I think, in the last year or two. It's something that I think business leaders in general have really tried to take to heart. And it seems to me that what we're talking about here, vulnerability, authenticity, trust, are kind of the key ingredients for psychological safety. And actually, we've done some research on psychological safety. We may circle back to that a little bit, but I want to, but Laken, and we've known each other for some, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years or something like that. And so it's really great to reconnect. But you're an NFL player, football, one of the ultimate, tough guy sports. And yet we're seeing kind of I think a real embrace of these these attitudes, new changes in attitudes. I mean, you're bringing authenticity and vulnerability, and I think more generally sports, with Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, and I think in these cases it's I think the connection to health and well-being couldn't be more clear, because in some sense, kind of echoing what Xavier said, it's like bodies and lives are on the line, right? If Simone Biles is not in the right frame of mind, she could break her neck, on the beam. So I'm just kind of interested to hear, how you've been in the league 7 years, 100 starts, congratulations. How
Thank you.
how have you seen this as a change? Where did it come from? Was it top down? Is it driven by the players or coaches? I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Wow, it's tough to follow my two other panelists, but I can definitely comment on vulnerability, especially in the football world. You said it right. Football is a tough guy sport. They expect you to be this guy coming in who can do everything, who's invincible, who's always there, who's always making plays, and always accountable. But a lot of that comes with kind of like, what I've learned over the years is kind of like fake it till you make it. A lot of people have these expectations for you and, want you to do all these things, but, that's just something, for a lot of young players that come in the league that I've learned that, that's you're kind of forced to be this person that people want you to be, but you're still trying to discover yourself in the league. So, that's one of the first things I've learned in joining when I first started playing football, is that like a lot of guys just weren't true to themselves, and that's kind of where it starts, and that's a combination of a lot of things, locker room, organization, coaches, other teammates, and a lot of factors that come into a player being true to themselves, and that's one of the first things that I've learned. In my career in the league, is that you first got to be true to yourself to be able to express yourself, not only to your teammates, to your fans, but, to, the game of football. So my personal experience, when I first got in the league, it was very tough. I didn't have an identity in the league. I didn't know who I was as a football player, and trying to discover that, it was extremely hard, and I did a lot of learning. I was humbled very quickly when I first got in the league. I had a lot of expectations from me, from myself and from my teammates. Being a first-round draft pick to Detroit Lions, that came with a lot of responsibility, I felt, and so early in my career, I felt I wasn't living up to that expectation, but and it was very hard for me to feel vulnerable around my teammates, around my coaches, and around people in the organization, because I feel like I wasn't living up to that expectation, and just kind of the level of fake it till you make it mentality was just high among everyone. And, I didn't see much growth early in my career. I got traded to San Francisco, 2017. When I first got there, honestly, I had no expectation of like what was going to happen with me in my career, but I was excited. And I came in, obviously, I didn't know anyone there. There's no trust between me and my teammates. There's no trust between me and my coaches. They don't know what I could do in the field. So I felt like for me to express myself to my coaches, I had to put it on the field. And that was the kind of the struggle that I put, kind of the hard thing that I put on myself was like, for my coaches and my teammates to trust me, I have to show up on the field every day. So I worked my butt off, and, I trained really hard. And, I was fortunate enough to start my second game there. And I've been a starter ever since. And and that can only attest to the trust that my team, my coaches, and my organization have in me. So it's just been great. And the environment that they created for me, just as a individual football player, has been nothing but phenomenal. I remember growing up in Chicago, I had a mentor, Bob Sperling. I always remember in the back of my head him telling me, just always stay true to yourself. And no matter what people tell you, you remember that you're born and raised in Jamaica, and you're a proud Jamaican. And I still take that to today. I try to be as open as possible to my teammates so they can learn about me as an individual, because I want to bring everything that I can to that team. And that can only be done by, having the leadership from top down, having the leadership from the ownership to the GM, the head coaches, and them being authentic in how they go about their business, which allows the team to be authentic and allows a fantastic working environment, to be successful. So I can say that I've lived that and been a part of that. We were fortunate enough to go to Super Bowl a couple years ago, 2019 season. And, it's been awesome experience, a roller coaster in my career, but it's been awesome.
Thank you, Laken. That's really, what a fantastic story. And, kudos to you. One of the things that, in terms of trust, it's not just about like a feeling. It's a feeling, but you invest your trust in people who show competence as well. And so you working your butt off was, I think, really, really critical for getting the trust of your teammates. You're not going to, your quarterback's not going to join you on a rollout if you're not actually demonstrating that you can, you can block the defensive end. I kind of wanted to actually, I also know one more thing that I really loved that you said, which and people might not agree with this, but fake it till you make it. And it's interesting because that's kind of the Wharton MBA credo. So, and it's like, they're sort of drinking from fire hoses. They've got, 2 years to kind of go from, 0 to 60 and become something. And there is something, I think, to that. So although we're talking here about authenticity, it's interesting because the research, like my colleague and co-author Jennifer Beer, who's at UT Austin, has done a lot of research on authenticity. And one thing that's really weird is that we tend to, we think of authenticity, being authentic as there being an alignment between your values, your personal values, and your traits, your personality, like who you are, and how you behave. But what it turns out is that people feel more authentic when they conform to certain societal norms, so that they're more like agreeable, they're more conscientious, they're more outgoing. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, it's like sort of the ultimate coworker. So people have this feeling that they're more authentic, but they may not be actually in alignment with who they are. And so I think what we're talking about here is something a little bit deeper in terms of authenticity. Zab, do you want to keep things rolling here?
Sure, absolutely. So this also, I think all of you spoke to another concept, which is sort of a new emerging area in neuroscience that people are sort of looking at, why we code switch. So Xavier and Laken and Kay, you all sort of referenced this idea that that you read your environment, right, and you sort of decided to change the way that you projected yourself. That idea of sort of code switching, in this case, it's linguistic in some of the work that's being done. Some of this is being done at Penn by Darren Johnson and Emily Falk in the communication neuroscience lab here at the Annenberg School. But they're really, this idea that you might nuance your language by reading the room, sort of becoming a person through what you act and what you do and how you say, through the lens of perceiving those of you that are around you, I think is a really new emerging area of like how we understand how the brain is starting to make those things, make those assumptions, disentangle them, et cetera. So Kay, you talked a little bit about the idea that that what you wanted to do was project, honesty. And I would really love to hear your thoughts on how you reinforce that, right? From a personal standpoint and how that began. But I'm more interested in what happened when you became a 25,000 person organization, multi-continent, and how as a leader. And as leaders, you promulgated that idea to the others who were leading, your fellow congregations, just in that space.
I think that because our early experience of both of us trying to live truly perfect, be as perfect in our character, in our behavior, in our demeanor, please everyone. When that all fell apart, when our marriage hit the rocks, and we were so miserable. I don't even know how to describe it. When I say marital hell, I'm not joking. In our personal lives, our professional life was okay. My husband was a youth pastor. He was successful. I was finishing college. So outwardly, things were going well, but inwardly, we were falling apart. And we just found that the pain of that we couldn't fake it any longer. We faked it as long as we could, but then we couldn't fake it any longer because the pain was just too great. Rick ended up in the hospital for depression. I remember driving home from, I was going to school in Los Angeles and we lived in Riverside about 50, 60 miles away. And I left a psychology class where we had to do some role playing about family relationships, and it got too close. I couldn't do it. I left the classroom in tears. I ran from the classroom in tears, got in my car, drove and sobbed all the way home. My husband's in a hospital for depression. We've been married, a few months, and we're thinking, how can we live the rest of our lives like this? We're in the public eye. We're supposed to have it all together. We can't function. What are we going to do? And that was so traumatic and so disorienting to us, because we thought life was going to be one way and it turned out to be something else. And the pain of that drove us to marital counseling and really taking a look at ourselves, what had been broken, the effect of the sexual molestation in my life that I had pretty much just decided was not a big deal, but actually, as we know with trauma, it was a really big deal. But we didn't know that then. And the decision that we made to do the hard work of change, of growth, of healing, I have a visual in my own head of that I was living in a tiny little box, and that little box was crushing me. And to be able to just break the walls of that box, to come out of that place of faking it, of pretending, of hiding, I knew I couldn't do it the rest of my life, or I was going to lose my mind. I feared my own mental sanity. My husband was clearly not dealing with it well. And that was such a marker in our lives, a moment in which you can look back and say that moment changed my life. That time period changed my life. And so for us, the rest of our marriage, the rest of our lives, we've been married almost 46 years in June it was, to live the rest of our lives knowing we were going to be in the public eye. We didn't know the church would grow the way it did. I mean, whoever knows those things, but it did. We didn't know that we would have a son with serious mental illness who would end up taking his life and putting us again in the public eye in a new way. Those were just not things that we knew or could have predicted in our 20s. But what happened to us in our 20s set us up for the decisions that we've made to live the rest of our lives in a certain way. We're not going back in the box. I'm not going back ever in the box. I've lived with freedom. I've lived with a sense of release and relief. And that is so great. There's nothing that's worth living inside those boxes that keep us from being true to who we are, true to telling our own stories in the way that they really are, and then finding the courage to keep going back again and again and again to grow. So that has made it, I think that determination, that mindset has made it easier for us through these decades to stay true to that course. We're not going in the box. We're going to be authentic. We're going to tell our stories. We're going to encourage everybody else in the congregation. We're human. We're like you. There are moments we get up in the morning and kind of roll over in bed and go, I'm not sure I like you, but everybody feels that way. We don't feel like we have to know all the answers. We don't feel like we have to have it all together. There's so much grace in that freedom. And I think that is what has kept us able to pass those values on over and over and over as the church has grown, expanded, and become a much bigger place than it was.
Great. It's really interesting, fascinating. So I think you sort of made a pact with yourself, right, to be authentic from the get-go, because it was a release. And I think that's a sort of a theme that we've seen over and over again. So
it's
Xavier,
a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure to be anything but authentic. That's enormous pressure that, there are occasions that we all have to fake it till we make it. We all have to do that at some points, but as a lifestyle, no. Momentary response in a situation, but lifestyle, no.
Yeah, and I think what you also spotlighted here is the tremendous toll that it can take, right, on mental health and well-being. And these are the conversations that are emerging right now, in our conversations around, what it means to be professional, what it means to be in the spotlight in new and different ways, right? Than we've ever have this idea of, what is authentic, as we know, is right now in the media spotlight about how young girls, right, are taking in information, through social media platforms, and deciding whether, how to respond to that. And I think, so similarly, I'd like to sort of hear from, Laken and Xavier, because there have also been very similar conversations about authenticity and bringing authenticity, especially around race, right, into dialogue. There's a really active Black LinkedIn sort of outlet right now that are talking about that. We have, I think, with McCarthy, I would assume, Xavier, that you are, not a minority in that context, and Laken, you are probably not a minority in the context of your work. And so how can we bring that into the fore, into conversation, and remain, true to ourselves and not code switch based on the room, and have that become a place of value for the cultures and the organizations that we're building? Xavier, I'll start with you.
So I love the question on code switching. It's something that I struggle to articulate to others. For me, it's a space where growing up, I learned certain skill sets when I would walk into a room being the only minority, the things I could say, the things I couldn't say, subjects I wanted to talk about, subjects we wanted to avoid. And after years of doing that and just being in that space, I would find myself in situations where I weren't the minority in the room and there were others who looked like me, and they looked at me differently. So now I found that I was in a space where the people who looked like me didn't relate to me. And the people who didn't look like me, who I was trying so desperately to relate to, weren't gonna relate to me. So this island that I was on became even smaller at that point, that those friendships had to be that much more solid because of it. So in the thought of code switching, it was tough then to do. And to your point, McCarthy embraces this and they promote leaders on merit. Construction by nature doesn't afford itself many minorities on the management side, maybe on the labor side of it, but on the inside management piece is very few that come into the space. So it's a challenge to do that. But even here, and I'm sure that's not quite psychological safety, but as I was just briefing the regional leadership team, as our local DE&I committee was briefing them, I said, hey, I still struggle with that. I still struggle with being able to say exactly what I know to be right or true, or at least my truth, right, in front of that group. But I challenged them to say, if I don't do it, who else who looks like me are going to do it, right? So that's the first thing that I'd like to say about that. And then if I think about this authenticity, what I decided was I was just going to be the best at what I did, right? If I'm the best engineer, if I'm the best spatial measurer that there is, then any of the other subjects that you're going to use to evaluate me on won't matter, right? Because I'm the best at this. But then becoming the best created an environment where everyone was in competition. You with me? So in that space, people who could have been allies, who could have been friends, who could have helped me through situations, I wasn't going to be open with them. It was really important that I was better than every other person in the room. And Zab, to your question, again, being one of one, I'm about to go to Missouri today to attend a conference to get some professional development units. And when I walk in that space, there won't be anyone else that looks like me in that space, right? Like I still deal with that on a regular basis. So I've had to learn as I've gone to become a business owner, I wouldn't be the best engineer anymore. I wouldn't be the best technician. So then that started to open up the door to trust others, to let it be less of a competition, to bring them in and bring them into that space. And so that started to open up a little bit more, and even more so here at McCarthy. There's less of a competition, at least for me, in the space that I'm operating in. I run a national business inside of McCarthy. So it's even more important that I have the skills. We have 5 different regions. I have 5 different presidents, a slew of different business developers. If I'm talking to someone in NORPAC, in San Jose, it's totally different than talking to someone in Omaha, Nebraska, right? And I've got teams that are that far apart. Someone in Atlanta versus someone in Phoenix. And oh my gosh, I wouldn't have thought, Zab, but to go from Fort Worth, Texas to Dallas, I need a wardrobe change. Like if I walk into Fort Worth, I've got to show up a certain way or they know I'm from Dallas, right? So all of that it's a struggle to maintain who I am, right? Because we're talking about being authentic, right? It's really a struggle to do that. But the partners here that we have at McCarthy have really reached out and embraced and given me an opportunity to do that. And I'm just going to keep plugging away. I hope I answered your question.
You did, of course. Laken, you have to add?
Xavier's spot on. I mean, I can only attest to like my experiences. I mean, I could tell you a story when, I was walking home from high school and, living in an apartment with my mom and other siblings. And, just before I opened up the back door to go in the apartment complex, a squad car came around and, told me to put my hands on the hood and, started to interrogate me, ask me where I was. And, I guess I was kind of being profiled at the time. And, it's kind of crazy because, I looked a certain way, so they treated me a certain way. And, it was very hard for me as an immigrant, really, to kind of understand what was happening to me at the time. And because I didn't know. I was only 15 years old. I'd never really experienced anything like that before. So, it turns out they were looking for someone, a gang member who got in a fight a couple blocks away, and he fits my description, I guess. So, and the officer at the time, he really didn't really let up until he saw who I was. And, he recognized me because I was on some article as a football player at Lane. And he was like, "Hey, you're the football player." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, you got the wrong guy, guys." And they just left. So experiencing something like that, especially being an immigrant, it was shocking to me. And so I had to learn about, racism and things like that the hard way growing up in Chicago. With no knowledge of what was going on around me in my environment, and then taking that on to, going to Duke and then graduating from Duke and, having that, perception of what people think of me based off how I look versus, who I am and the things that I've done. And, it was very hard for some people to kind of separate those two people because, they say like, "Oh, he's a big, scary football player versus, educated young Black man." And, I kind of learned about that, kind of the hard way, just throughout college and then going on to the league and, early on in my career, just being viewed as this type of person because of my background, and it was tough. And just as a young Black man growing up in the society, it's very tough to kind of like express yourself in a certain way because of how people see you. And just to kind of tie that into the league, everything that's going on, with the Black Lives Matters movement, everything went on with Kaepernick, and even today, everything that happened going on with Gruden and everything, it's tough because right now I feel the NFL is doing a really good job as an organization of getting rid of all that stuff and allowing young Black men to be more open, be more authentic, and be more true to themselves, where, I can say from my experience growing up, you couldn't open up to someone because people had these ideas of who you are, who you're supposed to be. So I guess that's kind of, I hope I answered your question too, but that's just kind of a little bit of my experience.
Thank you both. I mean, that was really fantastic. It does raise the point though, that we've talked a lot about authenticity and how that's a good thing. But it's not a good thing if you're a jerk, right, and a racist. And so there's some things that do have to. Some of those authentic personalities are not the ones that we want, and we have to figure out how to change those. But part of our mission here is to bring this back to neuroscience a little bit. So there's a little bit of a kind of educational mission here as well. And so when we're talking about our sense of self, who we are, identity, I'm actually engaged as a key part of the brain here, kind of the intersection of my fingers, like right back behind the third eye here, called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So it's engaged, like in smiling, he knows this, but it's engaged when we're kind of evaluate ourselves, but also when we evaluate other people, and in particular, people who we consider to be close others. And so one thing that I think is really powerful is that to create conditions, a culture of psychological safety, what we have to do is bring other people into, really into that part of our brain, into our own tribe, into ourselves. And one of the most powerful ways of doing that is actually by seeing things through other people's eyes, by taking their perspective. And we know that increases the sense of psychological safety and actually gets all of our brains in sync. And when we do that, that elevates trust, that elevates, all the good things that we want to happen. So there really is, I think, everything that we've talked about today has a real living biology underneath it. And it's one that we can actually access and change, all for the good.
If I could piggyback on the educational piece, I think also as I was listening to everyone speaking, what was stunning to me is the reinforcement that from a human behavior perspective, you all are in such different landscapes, in such different backgrounds and experiences, and yet this common thread of, where we struggle and what binds us, what helps us through, what's hard to do, where the fear is. And so I think it speaks to the human experience of where the challenges are and where the opportunities are.
I don't know how much time we have, Zab. I don't want to go over, but I wanted to say something to your point, Michael. I remember once, as I told you guys, wanting to be the best. Being the best meant that I didn't have a whole lot of time for others and others' opinions. And once one of my employees was speaking to me, and I looked at him, a guy who I respect a great deal, he's still with me today. And I said, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. I was just waiting to talk." Like I didn't listen to anything he said, Michael. Right? I didn't hear anything he said. And to your point, until I stopped waiting to talk and started listening, I never got to hear, and to your point, bring them into my tribe, right? Bring them in. I never experienced that. So I think someone may have mentioned that earlier, but I learned that was a key component. And now to hear you say that, I maybe feel like there's some
so there's vulnerability in the fact that you admitted that, so that's awesome. You're trusting this space and being authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I can even piggyback off that. I mean, what Michael said with psychological wellness, in the sports field, it's so important to just take care of your mental health, because it actually plays a big role in your performance on game day. I mean, just myself, just speaking from my experience, if you're thinking about something, you have psychological stressors outside in your life, that's going to creep up on you on game day. And honestly, just having that half a second split in your performance can just be so drastic in any game, really, because you're talking about points, you're talking about winning a game, you're talking about championships, really. And until people can understand that the mental health of a player, of an individual player, is so important when it comes to performance, I think a lot of organizations would be extremely successful if they can figure that out.
There's so much to say on that, but I know we're running out of time. So
we are. I think, I could spend the rest of the day with all of you. I mean, I feel like we're just cracking the surface here, but I am looking at the clock, and I know we started a few minutes late, so I let us, go over by a few minutes. So in maybe, a 30-second snip, could you send out your best advice, especially with regards to authenticity? And we'll start with Laken, and go to Xavier and Kay, and we'll wrap this up.
Okay. My advice, stay true to yourself. Stay true to yourself. Coming from a Jamaican, immigrant, stay true to who you are, stay true to who you were, and stay true to where you think you're going to be and that vision you have for yourself. Because your perception of yourself, no one can take that away from you. And you control how you think about yourself and your surroundings.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Laken. And I think what I'd say is very similar, which is trust yourself. Trust your surrounding, those who've been around you, who've loved you and cared for you. And I don't mean those who have just given you what you wanted, right? Those who truly loved you and truly cared for you. Lean into that. And if you can lean into that, you'll be able to do that in every other sector of your life, your personal relationship, your places at work. You'll be a better brother, sibling, a better son, daughter, like all of those things will just come from that, trusting in that space about who you are, what you are. But also understand that those things that got you to where you are today will not get you to where you want to be tomorrow. And you won't get that without inviting those people into your tribe, Michael. I'm going to go with that one from now on, just so you know. Okay.
Yeah, you set up exactly what I was going to say, which is to have relationships at such a level that you can invite people to tell you the truth. Yes, we have our own truth that we live with, but sometimes we have blind spots. In fact, we all have blind spots, and you can't grow without challenging your own blind spots. And so develop relationships at such a level that you can ask somebody, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And then when people tell you, then take that in, absorb it, eat the meat, throw away the bones, and then be willing to do the hard work of change, to become even the person that you long for and desire to be. But that I think what we've all just said, there's some key in relationships that when you have close relationships, people who know you, love you, they can tell you the truth about you, you can incorporate that. And from there, you can take that and grow and transform into more of that vulnerable, authentic, trustworthy person that we'd all like to be.
Great. And I'll leave our last words to Leila and Michael.
Thank you, Zach. Michael, you want to go first? Darn. So my advice would be to take all of these panelists' advice because they are spot on. And I think Kay's definitely resonates most deeply with me in terms of the relationships that you have and cherishing those ones where you can incorporate all of this, being safe, being seen, being heard, trusting them, being authentic, and then being able to receive what comes from that. And my deepest gratitude to all of you for the incredible contribution that you've made across such a diverse spectrum of points. So I'll hand it to Michael.
Wow, I get the last word. That's quite a place to be. I'm really grateful to everyone here and everything that you shared with us. You were all authentic and vulnerable, and I feel a lot of trust here, and so that's been really wonderful. My kind of parting words have to do with those of you who are leaders out there, and I think everybody here is leader, but if you are a leader out there, I'd like you to try to do what you can to build on what we talked about today, to create a culture, create a situation where the people that you work with or who are on your team actually feel the safety, feel that it's natural and okay to be authentic and vulnerable, to express themselves. And we know that, empathy is sort of a key thing right now, and everybody wants more empathy in their companies and in their organizations, but, the people at the top are afraid to express it. And so I think, we need to go beyond that fear and really help everyone to create the conditions where everybody can be themselves.
All right. And with that, that's a wrap. Thank you all for attending. We look forward to our future conversations and the next podcasts. So tune in November 9th, and we will have yet another fantastic panel of speakers. But really, it's been our pleasure. It's been great to get to know each of you across the hour in our planning sessions. Laken, Xavier, Kay, thank you so much from all of us at Wharton Neuroscience. We're really excited to follow your work and see where it goes next. So thank you, everyone.